All right, we're recording. Hi, Maddie.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for joining me today from your car because you're always on the go.
That's me.
So, why don't we start by you telling the audience who you are and what you do?
Okay, well, my name's Maddie Haenel. I am, I happen to work for Ball Aerospace, an aerospace company in Colorado, and I do calibration. I'm a calibration technician, and I also do many other things. I have many interests, and I have a really, you know, interesting background. But on top of that, I happen to be a transgender woman.
That's right.
Uh, yes.
And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. Before we start on your story, can you tell me your intention for sharing your story with us today?
My intention um, is visibility. Number one, visibility for transgender folks is I feel is essential within our community right now. Um, Within the broader society right now, I think it's important. So I'd like to share things about me and my transition that will hopefully um, raise awareness, give people an idea of who I am, and as an example of the diversity within the trans community as a part of the greater community.
Yeah, good. And I think that in addition to this visibility, there's also a lot of fear and vulnerability involved in that. So I thank you so much for doing this interview with me because I think this is really important. So tell me a little bit about your journey. When did all this start? When did the realization start happening for you?
Well, the first inklings came when I was a child. Um, I was probably 4 years old. My earliest memory, um, I was being put to bed. It was bedtime, and my mom was searching for clean pajamas for me to wear. I didn't have any clean pajamas. And she digs out an old cotton blouse of hers, and she puts it on me as sort of a nightgown kind of thing because I didn't have any clean pajamas. So I specifically remember protesting because I said, no, that's for girls. That's not for me. But I also remember once I was wearing it, how it felt right. It felt good. I was 4 years old. I had no idea. I had never heard of transgender or anything of the sort, or I had no idea. But I just know I felt good wearing that article of clothing and going to bed that night. I slept like I'd never slept in my life. So that was kind of that was that. You know, I went through my childhood. I never and necessarily put any weight into that, but as I think back, there are many other little instances similar to that where I just felt different than what I thought boys should be or should think. And I wanted to play with Barbie dolls and things like that. And, you know, when I was a kid, Care Bears were a big thing. I wanted a pink Care Bear, but but I ended up asking my parents for a blue one because I felt like even though I was very young, I had an older brother and I knew that I'd be made fun of if I had something girly. So I buried it deep down inside for a very long time.
Yeah.
Um,
Let me ask a question about this.
okay.
Because I think that some people who don't understand what transgender is and what it means might think, well, I've had experiences like that too. And I think even about myself and how I wanted a racetrack and I couldn't get one. My mom would put me in ballet even though I wanted to play soccer. And I think that we can all kind of relate to feeling out of place. So
Mhm.
what was the difference, or how did you find that? What was the shift in defining just feeling out of place like everybody and
Yeah.
really like stepping into your identity?
That's a very good question, and that does bring up a very good point. It took me a long time to learn about myself and understand myself. It wasn't when I was a child, and you know, we like to gender certain behaviors and certain things, but there are plenty of little boys who like things that happen to be feminine, who are boys. It does not mean they're transgender at all. And same thing with girls. Um, it's just a thing. For me, it was experimental into adulthood. I was in my early 20s and I was experimenting with cross dressing a little bit and just really kind of trying to find myself. Um, I was probably mid to late 20s before I really started seriously thinking that maybe I'm transgender, but it took even longer than that to wrestle with it. And I was probably, um, first time I really made a statement that I thought I might transition was probably 30 or so. Um, and at that point, at that time, I was married, and there were complications with my marriage that delayed the actual um, transitioning. I had started kind of sneaking behind my wife's back as far as dressing, and I was obsessed with shoes. I I would literally buy high heels online and um, secretly like have them sent to a friend's house because I had come out at that point to a close friend. Um, I also found a place here in Denver called the Gender Identity Center where they had um, group meetings for cross dressers, also for transitioning, those who were transitioning. And I would go there mostly when my wife was out of town. I would go there as it was really just a safe place for me to go and be myself. And I initially went to a cross dressers group, and then I went to a transitions group. And because at that time I was still like, am I just a cross dresser? Am I just, and for those who don't know, there's a very big distinction between a cross-dresser and a transgender person. It may be a phase that someone who's transgender goes through in trying to find themselves, but sometimes people are cisgendered. Um, there may be a cisgender male who likes to wear women's clothing for um, because they just like to do it. Sometimes it may be a sexual thing, sometimes not. But they may just like to do that. But they're perfectly happy switching back into their male clothes and going about their business and their day and living life that way. Um, I was wrestling with all of that, with where I was. So
Yeah.
it was a process, talking to other people, meeting other people, going to these meetings, and kind of really learning who I identified more with, and just coming to terms with how I felt inside.
Right. And I love that you brought up that there's a distinction between cross-dressing and being transgender, because I think there's a lot of confusion there. I think another area where there's a lot of confusion is the difference between being gay and being transgender. Can you say something about that?
Sure. A lot of people don't understand that distinction. There's sexuality and there's gender identity. They're two very different things. Um, Sexuality is uh, who you're attracted to, who you want to be with, and gender identity is who you are, as a, you know, the gender you identify with.
Right.
So I know lots of trans people who identify as, trans women who identify as lesbians, um, trans women who identify as heterosexual, um, trans men who are gay or are heterosexual. There's all variations, and everything is a very broad spectrum. There's a spectrum of sexuality. There's also a spectrum of gender identity.
Right.
Um, People fall anywhere on that.
Right. And I think that that's what we're
So it's
starting.
multidimensional.
Yeah. And I think that we're starting to get more understanding around that, but I think sometimes the media portrays transgender as basically, I feel like transgender is shown as like a wolf in sheep's clothing, that transgender is someone pretending to be something in order to be a predator, kind of is how, a lot of transgender are portrayed
Yeah,
in media. And I think it's important that if we understand the difference between gender identity and sexuality, we'll understand that. But gay people have also had that kind of put on them as well, that they're maybe sometimes seen as predators when um, who someone wants to be with, as you say, who we're sexually attracted to isn't correlated with um, dysfunction. And I think that there needs to be some
right,
clarity around
exactly.
that. So, well, I think that you're incredibly brave to recognize this about yourself. And I think all of us go through a time where we do a lot of seeking to our identity. So once you began to transition, what did you start to notice? What started to change other than, the obvious physical things? What else did you notice that changed?
Well, I'd say the number one thing is I became a happier person. Um, I became more open. Um, I wouldn't say that's my experience. That, and every experience is different. Um, because I was able to be myself. So as I transitioned, um, you know, my very beginnings of transition, I was still in. I worked for the National Guard, so I was in the military, and this is at a time where there were whisperings that Obama was going to um, remove the restriction of being openly transgender in the military. But it hadn't been approved yet, and it hadn't. There was talk about it, but not enough for me to be open about the fact that I was transgender and I wanted to transition. I was towards the end of my career, though, I started taking, once I had fully decided that I was transitioning and this was happening, I started coming out slowly to people that I trusted. And it was it's symbolic of that feeling that I had, that change, is in that I'd come out to one person and then that would go well. And then I couldn't wait to find the next person. And it went from being something I was scared to death to do. There was a time when for me to dress up in women's clothes and go out in public, I would not do it unless I could absolutely 100% not be seen as cross-dressing or being trans or anything. I did not want to be identified. Um, but it got to be where it was a game I'd play, like, who can I come out to next? It was so exciting. I cannot, that it's hard to explain just how deep the joy that of coming out became for me. It was like this massive weight lifted off of me. It was liberation, and really that continued after I was out pretty much to everybody. It was I became much more outgoing than I ever was prior to. This is not the case for all trans people. For some people, they have a tendency to still cling to that um, introvert inside themselves. It's a testament to the diversity. It's also a testament to the climate in which I came out. I came out right around the time that trans folks were getting more visibility and there was more acceptance than there had been in the past. And I also had a good job. I was lucky enough to transition. I left my job in the military and walked straight into a job in aerospace in a company that is very um, focused on diversity and inclusion and acceptance. And um, this is a place I felt safe. So I was able to transition there with no adverse effects, no adverse actions, no discrimination against me. At least that was noticeable. And not all trans people have that. So my positive attitude, my positive outlook on life, um, I'm very thankful that I have the luxury of having that. Um, it's not always the same story for everybody.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah. Anyway, that was probably the number one thing.
Yeah. Well, and I'm kind of giggling to myself because I know you and I know your story. So I'm laughing when you said that you were no longer an introvert because what you're doing now is far from introverted. Say a little bit more about what
That's
you've really
true.
stepped into. Tell me more about your
Um,
fashion design and what's even come from that, from your modeling and
okay, so years ago, and actually this is before I transitioned, I started going to school for fashion design. But at that time it was very, if I look back and I'm really honest about it, I think it was a way for me to express my feminine side when I was still very down inside. Um, but I transitioned while I was going to school for fashion design. And I so as time progressed, I became more and more sure of myself, and I started putting myself out there. And eventually, I had an opportunity to do modeling because I was dealing with or I was very involved with the fashion scene in Denver. I saw opportunities and I put myself out there as a model. And that was just another step in my feeling comfortable with who I am. And I can tell you, there was um, a moment for a long time, I would have told you it was the absolute happiest moment of my life when I was doing this fashion show in Denver. It was my first real fashion show as a designer, and I was showing three of my designs. And at the end, the designers got to walk on the runway with the model. Well, this is right at that time where I was getting out of the National Guard and joining and getting my job in aerospace. And I walked out on that runway. It was my first time really in this public platform as a designer and wearing and presenting as female to the world. And I walked out there at the runway, and the crowd received me so well, and the applause. They loved my dress. I felt completely accepted. It was the most amazing feeling in the world. So that kind of progressed, and I had opportunities to model. I modeled at Denver Fashion Week. At that time, it was called Denver Fashion Weekend, but I did that. I modeled at an event called Red Ball in Denver, and a couple other things, and it really was an amazing feeling. And then,
Then you really got
um,
comfortable in your skin.
right, and all of this is just progressive. So 3 years ago, I had gender confirmation surgery, and after coming out of my gender confirmation surgery, again, it was another one of those pivotal moments in my life. Waking up, I couldn't even feel anything. I was so drugged up, but I felt this just, I was elated at life, and everything just felt right. And I, within a month and a half of that, I found a place called Rockstar Pole Fitness. And I tried a class with a friend, and it's been an obsession ever since. Um, from the moment my friend suggested doing it, I knew it was what I wanted to do. I am one of the only people ever to show up to my very first pole fitness class with my pleaser heels purchased and ready, because I knew I was going to love it, and I knew it was going to be a thing, and I was going to wear my heels. And I got very involved. I found this amazing community in pole fitness, um, where I found complete acceptance for who I was, or for who I am. And it's an amazing, accepting community for women, for anybody. There's men who do pole fitness. I know a 60-some-year-old meteorologist, cisgender, heterosexual man who loves performing in pleaser heels that glow and light up. And it's just, I found this community that is so non-judgmental, um, and that has helped me in amazing ways to combat gender dysphoria, um, which is, it's an amazingly unexpected result, because when you walk into a pole studio, a lot of people are worried that, there's going to be these women in there who have perfect bodies, and and are so sexy and so everything, and they're going to be judging me. But it's so the opposite. It's none of that. And I've had nothing but support from the pole community and at Rockstar Pole Fitness. And it's been just this amazing experience.
Cool.
Um, and I'll finish off with um, since I started pole, I've performed in showcases. Last year, I did my first pole competition called PSO. They have a mountain pole championship. I performed at PoleCon, which just happened to be hosted in Denver this year. And I am heading for another pole competition a week from tomorrow. I perform. So yeah, it's become a big part of my life.
Yeah, I love it. I love hearing just how inspiring it is to hear your journey of how your transition has gone and how you've fully stepped into all that you are and can be. And that just is very inspiring. So thank you so much for sharing your story. Is there anything else you want to add before I ask you my fun question?
Um, I think the only thing I'll add is that trans people are just regular people. Um, Today, you've heard one person's story. Every single one of us has a different experience and a different story. Um, but we happen to be born a certain way, you know, and we have this one thing with gender identity um, that that connects us that we've each had to deal with. But aside from that, we are as diverse as the rest of the world. We come from all walks of life, all shapes and sizes, all ethnicities, all backgrounds. Some of us come from conservative backgrounds, some of us come from liberal backgrounds, some of us come from who knows what. We all have different experiences. So um, don't make assumptions about anybody because of their gender identity. Um, just see us for get to know us for who we are.
That's important. Thank you so much for that. It's true. We shouldn't make assumptions about anybody. Get to know them as a person. Absolutely. Thank you, Maddie. All right, my fun question I want to ask you is what's currently bringing you joy, or what's your guilty pleasure right now?
Well, gosh. Um, hmm. I've the number one thing has already been covered, but let's see. Um,
Maybe I should ask you how many shoes you have in your closet.
well, that's true. That's true. Okay, we can take that angle. Um, so, well, I will share with you this because I have always been obsessed with shoes since you brought shoes up. Um, Shoes are such a big part of uh, well, you don't have to wear shoes to pole dance, right? But it certainly helps, and it certainly makes it more fun. And so I have a class that I take, and it's called Triple X, and it definitely pushes your um, your comfort levels with yourself, and it's very body positive and about getting in tune with your personal sexuality. Um, and something that I think is healthy for every single person to um, to be able to see themselves as a sexual person and be okay with it. But we always heels aren't required for that class, but they're definitely encouraged, and it's better if you have them. And that class has also helped me a lot in dancing and walking in heels. We get into different characters and we walk across the floor in our heels and have to be try to make it natural. Um, this has led me to um, I'm dancing with this group called Circa Vida, and our next performance for Halloween, I am doing Catwoman,
Okay.
and I started my costume with the shoes. I bought thigh high, patent leather, um, platform stiletto pleasers that are, you should see them.
They're blowing your
So
mind.
yeah, they are mind blowing, and I cannot wait to dance in them um, in front of a big crowd of people. But so yeah, I'd say yeah, that's definitely a guilty
That's your
pleasure
guilty
and an
pleasure.
obsession.
Very good. Well, thank you again, Maddie, for sharing your story with us. Thank you for your bravery and your vulnerability.
You're welcome. You're welcome, and thank you for having me um, on to share. Yeah, this has been amazing to be able to share with you.
Good. Thank you so much. I'm going to put your contact information in the video notes so that if anyone wants to reach out to you and connect, see your awesome designs, maybe come check out a pole competition, you're more than welcome to do that. I'll even throw in a link
Right.
for the Rockstar Fitness so that we can give them a little plug as well.
Well, I'm sure they would appreciate that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Maddie. I hope you have a great day.
Okay, you too. Thank you.
Of course.